Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging Age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all, it is October 8th, 2022. At least that's when I'm recording this. I'm recording this very early in the morning, so I have to speak rather quietly. Apologies for that. I also have a bit of a cold right now, so my voice is a bit gravelly. Just due to my cold and the resulting low energy I've had lately, it's taken me a bit of time to polish this up and publish it. It looks like it'll be October 11th by the time this will be published. I want to share something here now that came up for me very clearly several days ago while I was recording and working on 3 episodes, which I published in fairly rapid succession. And during that time, I was kind of really in a deep state. It was like I was channeling or downloading a whole ton of stuff. And one thing that has perplexed me for a very long time, probably since around the time the former guy was elected in the United States, the former president, and it pertains to this whole phenomenon of how so many people seem to be just acting completely irrationally and crazy, from my perspective and from the perspective of others as well. Now, I don't think we've seen anything like that happen on such a huge scale it's got to be generations. It may even be since the 1930s in Germany. This kind of mass delusion. And I have done a ton of reading on this. I have tried to explore it from many different perspectives intellectually, trying to figure out, what's going on and why. And nothing has fully satisfied me. I've read about authoritarianism, the psychology of it. I have considered all of the economic factors that might be contributing to this. How can so many people be completely detached from reality? Meanwhile, we seem to have this sort of psychic and spiritual renaissance occurring at the same time. And that is a phenomenon in and of itself. This is a real rabbit hole. I just know from personal experience that if I don't express these kinds of downloads within a reasonably short amount of time, I will regret it, because that's happened to me numerous times already. So it's kind of like you get something and then you don't want to lose it. The way it works is that when you're in a higher state of consciousness, things that would otherwise be completely inscrutable, or if not impossible to understand, can suddenly just be very clear and make perfect sense in that higher state of consciousness. But then when you kind of go back into your more normal state of consciousness, it can very quickly become muddled and confusing and foggy, because some things can only be understood from a higher state of consciousness. This is the multidimensional aspect of reality and our experience that I have talked about before. Anyway, I don't know if I can express this as clearly and vividly as I perceived it maybe 5 or 6 days ago, but I'll try. And to me, this is extremely important. Let me start by asking you to consider this. Have you ever been in a situation where you intuitively, deeply knew that you had to do something or change something? You just have this knowing, but then you resist it because you're afraid of the consequences or the implications, or you're afraid of just change itself. You're kind of stuck in a situation or a pattern and it's comfortable because you're familiar with it. And yet, like I said, you have this knowing that something needs to change. So in effect, you're being in resistance to this call or urge. I've experienced that. I think most people have been in that situation at some point or other. And so the deeper you go into resistance, it gets harder and harder to maintain, because in effect, to maintain the status quo that you know is outmoded or that is no longer serving you, it's like when you're acting against your intuition or some kind of higher calling. And the more that you do that, the more you go into resistance, the more you are in effect deceiving yourself. And then the more you go into this kind of spiral of self-deception in order to maintain some kind of status quo that you know that you need to leave behind or evolve beyond, the more in effect you start lying to yourself. It's kind of like in a recent episode, I talked about how deep in our hearts we know certain things. We know that things are right or wrong, and that we need to be aligned with the truth. And the more we deny that, the more we have to spin a web of lies and self-deceit in order to maintain some kind of defunct status quo. So this is in effect a mode of being when you're in a state of self-deception. And I think that what's happening on a mass scale is that we have a significant chunk of the population who are in that mode of self-denial and self-deception in order to preserve a reality or a status quo or paradigm that deep in their hearts they know is invalid and illegitimate. Now, having been in that situation myself at various times, it can become extremely uncomfortable the deeper you go into this state of self-denial and self-deception, because these lies kind of start eating away at you. It's like the universe is trying to push you forward and you're saying, no, no, no. In past episodes, I have described this energy of petulant ignorance or belligerent ignorance. And the longer you're in that state, the more difficult it can become. It's like there's this weight on your shoulders that just keeps growing and growing and growing, as if at some point you simply won't be able to carry it anymore and you're going to break. Like it just keeps gnawing at you from the inside. So it can feel like you're actually kind of going crazy. And the other side of this that I got very clearly, I just saw this very clearly, is that the energies here are lifting. You know, a lot of people have talked about this. But the energy, I really just saw it very clearly. The energies here are lifting, and it's becoming increasingly hard for people to maintain and stay in that state of willful ignorance and denial. And it's not just outer reality that's reflecting this back to them. It's happening in their hearts. So this is, whoa, I'm getting strong energy here. This is an extremely uncomfortable place to be when you're kind of at odds with your own heart. Your higher self and your soul are calling to you, and you're trying to block it out. You're desperately trying to pretend that it's not actually happening, that you're not experiencing what you're actually experiencing, this state of denial. It's kind of like, if it goes on too long, it can literally make you crazy. This is willful or self-induced delusion, whether it's done consciously or not. And so the whole planet is evolving, and there's a large number of people who are just in that state of saying, no, 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 trying to shut their eyes, pretending that that's not happening because they're fearful, confused, disoriented, or they don't understand, or it's irrational from their perspective. And in order to maintain this self-deception, people will look for external cues to validate or reinforce their perspective, even though deep in their hearts, they know that that is wrong. The ego is trying to validate why they're doing what they're doing, even if it conflicts with their heart. So willfully trying to manifest validation might mean seeking out and joining and participating in movements or groups and organizations that reinforce your own existing worldview or paradigm. Political groups, social groups, religious groups and organizations, etc., or communities of people of like mind who share your paradigm, even if it's flawed. That's a way of reinforcing your ego and making you feel more secure, less vulnerable, and at the same time, validated. Hence the echo chambers and the self-reinforcing feedback loops and resulting alienation that are often discussed. And it can go to the point where people actually cause great harm to themselves and their loved ones with long-term relationships ending as a result of this when the behavior becomes obsessive. Now, this tactic is just really postponing the inevitable. We could label it spiritual procrastination. And of course, we have all of the parasitic opportunists who try and amplify and capitalize on people's fears and confusion, making the problem more intractable and exacerbating it. Because we're all spiritual beings. There's a part of us that is constantly connected to spirit and the source of all things. So what I'm arguing is that these people are not just in a state of denial about reality. There's tons of evidence showing why generally people on the political right are in denial about facts and reality. Now, that is a very uncomfortable place to be. Having been there myself at times, and generally this is going back way, into my youth and stuff, for the most part. Yeah, generally, I don't think I've been in that state seriously since I was a teenager kind of thing. But I do know what that experience is like. And like I said, it's extremely uncomfortable. And you can literally be sweating almost like the pressure keeps building in your nerves. And you're in this state of just constant avoidance. It's like you're running from yourself and trying to hide and hoping it just goes away. You're going to have to confront it at some point. This calling in you. And then when you do, eventually, when you just let go and give in, it's a huge relief. And then suddenly everything just becomes easy. Have you been there? Probably. It's like you're at war with yourself. There's this battle and it's completely needless. It's completely pointless. But because you lack faith or trust in the universe and in spirit, or you're insecure or fearful, you just go into denial. That's what happens. So we can at least have compassion and empathy because we've probably experienced something similar ourselves, although maybe not to the same degree. And that's what's going on. As the energies here on Earth continue to elevate, it becomes increasingly challenging and untenable for these people to maintain these beliefs and attitudes that simply are indefensible. And in their hearts, they know this to be true, but their egos are at battle with their hearts, basically. I'm glad I'm not experiencing that because it would be extremely stressful and difficult and unpleasant. I guess what I'm saying is it's not just ideological and it's not just political. This mass delusion, this mass craziness that we're seeing going on, it's an internal battle that people are having with higher truth versus their egoic attachments and beliefs and structures. In extreme cases, where beings are extremely resistant to the pull or call of spirit, they may become so obstinate and defiant that they actually begin to consciously choose to be in darkness and to express darkness as a form of rebellion or resistance, to the point where they, like I said, are consciously choosing to be in darkness. Now, that is a fairly extreme situation, but it does occur. These beings, these souls, or these manifestations of souls, can get stuck in this position for many lifetimes. I have even read of rare cases where some beings get so locked into darkness that they are irretrievable or irreparable. But again, those are apparently very rare. When one being deliberately causes pain or harm or suffering to another, you're really starting to get into dark territory, where causing suffering to others actually gives you pleasure, is crossing a line. This is the deliberate infliction of pain and suffering and taking away another's free will. Wow. Yeah, I'm getting some energy here. So there's energy here. So this is a turning point or a tipping point. And the further you go down into the darkness, the harder it is to come back. It's not impossible because there is grace and forgiveness and endless love, boundless love. But I'm getting energetic reinforcement here again. So that is a line that I'm sure many of us have come close to, and maybe even some of us have crossed in some lifetime. But we can get so cut off from our conscious spiritual connection that we, in effect, kind of become lost. Not wanting to dwell on that too long because it's a very negative and sad, very sad situation. But it does occur, and it explains some of the things that happen in our world. Just to be clear, Source never cuts us off. We cut ourselves off if we choose to do that. One more thing I want to add, and that is this. Anybody who's paying attention to what is happening in the world is aware that there is a tremendous amount of really dark stuff going on that seems to be bubbling up all over the world. And I'm very curious and I like to understand things, but this has puzzled me for a very long time. Why is this happening now? How come nobody predicted this would be occurring at this point in time? And if anyone knows of anyone who has predicted this, and I mean years ago, not in the past few years, before it started to happen, please let me know. Put it in the comments. So, of course, I do try to stay informed. I do a lot of reading, as I've said before. And I've been going like, what on earth is going on? Well, the reason I'm adding this here in this episode is because I believe it is the same thing. What's happening is that there's a lot more light coming into the planet, and so the contrast with the darkness is a lot more extreme than what we have been familiar with in the past. Bad stuff was happening in the past, of course, but now we are kind of like hyper aware of it because it is so foreign and irritating if you are carrying more light. And in my own personal experience recently, I had this thing where I was getting a lot of like memories from the past that would just randomly pop into my head. A lot of stuff that I hadn't thought about in a very long time. And often it involved people and situations and events that occurred. And from my perspective now, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I should never have even associated with that person. And that person was actually harmful to me. But at the time, I was kind of oblivious to it, or I was just being too empathic or whatever. And so when I reflect on my past now, there's a lot of situations that, from where I stand currently, I would find extremely uncomfortable. Whereas, like I said, in the past, I would have been more dull, or my senses would have been more dull. I would have been more accepting, more forgiving. It's kind of like my standards have improved, or at least energetically. I think what's going on now is that our vibration is increasing and it changes everything. It changes our perspective, not only of the present, but of the past. And I think it's also changing our perspective of reality. There are things in reality now that are just completely unacceptable and distasteful to us. And this appears much more dramatically and emphatically because our perspective is coming from a higher vibration generally than it did in the past. Now, we've all had peak spiritual experiences, but what I'm describing is something that is more consistent. The baseline is higher. So I'm saying that's happening at the same time, that there's a whole bunch of people who are in resistance to this energy. And then there's those of us who aren't. And those of us who aren't, our perspective is raising. And those who are in resistance are kind of digging in and are becoming more entrenched. Now, we are making this shift from the Age of Pisces into the Age of Aquarius. And I've talked a lot about what the Age of Aquarius will look like. And I can assure you that the Aquarian energy will rule the day. Strong energy here. Just hang in there. We're in this transitional period. As it gets lighter, things can look darker, ironically, because we see the darkness much more readily and dramatically. It's like how shadows are more pronounced at midday due to the more extreme contrast between the light and the dark. But the light is going to win. How am I ever getting strong energy right now? It's incredible. Holy, it's beautiful. The light will win. You can't stop an age from occurring. It's just not possible. The Aquarian energy is coming in and it will not relent. So I don't know how this all settles out. That remains to be seen. But nothing can stop this from happening. I'm going to put links in the description of this episode for how you can access my community tab, join my contact list, and to any other resources that are relevant to this episode. Like I said, when I look at it from this perspective, I can feel compassion and empathy for these people because I've had that experience myself and I know how terrible and uncomfortable it can be. And I don't see this resolving itself easily because I think the energies here are just continuing to elevate. And so the deeper you go into denial, the harder it gets to extract yourself and get back on track. Now, it'll be interesting to see if some of these people start letting go and giving in and what happens. And maybe they'll start talking about it and sharing that experience. I don't know. It'll be interesting to observe to see how this plays out. Yeah, this is just like petulant resistance to these increasing energies, the increasing consciousness that's occurring here on Earth. Thanks for everything. Thanks for your wonderful comments. I have created a Facebook page. Please see the episode description for important details and links. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.